The German concentration camp system, by the final years of the Second World War, had grown into a sprawling network of interconnected facilities. Each camp had a defined purpose, ranging from political imprisonment to forced labor to industrial support. Some became administrative hubs, supervising dozens of subcamps scattered across surrounding territories. The commandants placed in charge wielded considerable authority. Their duties included managing prisoner labor output, coordinating with industrial partners, enforcing discipline, and reporting to higher SS leadership. In the chaotic environment of wartime Germany, many of these commandants operated with extensive autonomy. Records show that some used that autonomy to impose strict and punishing regimes. Within this system, Dachau functioned as a key administrative center. Established early in the Nazi era, it eventually controlled a complex chain of satellite camps dedicated to labor-intensive work supporting armament factories, construction projects, and wartime logistics. As Germany's military situation deteriorated, demands for labor increased. Prisoners, drawn from political groups, ethnic minorities, captured resistance fighters, and deported civilians, were pushed into exhausting work schedules with insufficient food and harsh oversight. Welcome to World War Lore. If you haven't already, subscribe and turn on the bell icon for notifications. The subcamps tied to Dachau, sometimes referred to as commando units or labor detachments, became sites where discipline was enforced with rigid strictness. It was into this environment that Arnold Lipman emerged as a significant figure. Born in 1909, Lipman entered adulthood during a period of increasing militarization in Germany. By the time the SS expanded its role in administering detention and labor facilities, Lipman had already advanced within its ranks. His rise continued through the 1930s and early 1940s, reflecting a combination of loyalty, administrative ability, and willingness to enforce SS directives. The historical records do not present him as a frontline combat officer. Instead, his trajectory shows a shift toward internal management roles. As the war progressed, Lipman achieved the position of commandant over Dachau's coffering subcamps, an administrative and supervisory responsibility that placed him over thousands of prisoners. His authority extended across work detachments, guard units, labor schedules, and disciplinary enforcement. Reports and testimonies acquired after the war describe his tenure as one marked by strict control, punitive labor expectations, and severe consequences for infractions. Prisoners remembered him not as a distant administrator, but as an active, present authority figure whose decisions shaped daily conditions. Witness accounts gathered later indicate that Lipman maintained tight oversight over work output. Prisoners assigned to labor details often worked under demanding conditions, and failures to meet quotas could lead to punishment. Survivors described an environment in which physical exhaustion was common, and rest periods were limited. Guards under Lipman's command were expected to enforce discipline rigorously, and prisoner statements indicate that rough treatment was not uncommon. The environment created under his leadership resulted in widespread suffering, although documentation varies on whether Lipman personally carried out acts of violence or issued orders enabling them. By 1944, Germany's military losses placed increased pressure on forced labor systems. Transportation networks collapsed under Allied bombing, supplies dwindled, disease spread rapidly through overcrowded barracks. Many subcamps lacked sufficient medical support or sanitation. In such conditions, mortality rates increased across the entire system. The administrators overseeing these camps were expected to maintain output despite deteriorating conditions. According to later testimonies, the administrative decisions made by Lipman contributed to sustained harshness during this period. When Allied forces liberated Dachau and its subcamps in 1945, they documented large numbers of malnourished, exhausted prisoners. Investigators collected evidence from survivors, secured SS records, and arrested personnel connected to the camp administration. Lipman was identified, detained, and transferred to the jurisdiction of the U.S. Military Tribunal, responsible for prosecuting crimes committed within the Dachau system. The tribunal's mandate covered a broad range of offenses, including mistreatment, forced labor abuses, and deaths resulting from camp policies. During the proceedings, witnesses recounted experiences under Lipman's command. Their statements described forced labor conditions, disciplinary beatings carried out under guard supervision, and fatalities linked to exhaustion and mistreatment. Some testimonies indicated that prisoners were subjected to punitive measures for disobedience or perceived inefficiency. Others documented deaths resulting from brutal working conditions, inadequate rations, and exposure to severe weather tasks during outdoor labor tasks. Although the tribunal recognized that systemic failures played a role in deaths across the camp network, it also noted that commandants bore personal responsibility for enforcing and maintaining these conditions. Lipman's trial did not revolve around battlefield actions or strategic decisions. Instead, it focused on administrative authority, how he managed the camp, the degree of violence tolerated or encouraged, and the consequences of policies enacted under his leadership. The prosecution presented him as a direct participant in a system that caused widespread suffering. The defense attempted to argue that Lipman acted within the regulations of the SS and that broader systemic breakdowns contributed to the high death rates. However, the tribunal prioritized survivor testimonies, eyewitness accounts, and the established pattern of abuses documented across the camp network. The court ultimately found Lipman guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The emphasis on the authority held by commandants placed responsibility firmly on their shoulders. Those who oversaw subcamps where mistreatment occurred or where prisoners died as a result of enforced labor conditions were held accountable. In the tribunal's view, Lipman's leadership role made him culpable for the sustained brutality and fatalities documented under his administration. The topics we touch on this channel are very sensitive, so if you haven't already, please subscribe, like, and share this video to avoid YouTube's algorithm suppressing the video. Let's get back into the video. Once the verdict was issued, Lipman was transferred to Landsberg prison, where executions of convicted war criminals from the Dachau trials were carried out. The procedure followed a strict military protocol. On May 29, 1946, he was led into the prison yard. The execution was conducted by hanging, the method used for most of those convicted in the Dachau trial series. Records from the execution detail the time, location, and confirmation of the sentence being carried out, but do not include descriptive or emotional elements. It was one of several executions conducted that day as part of the tribunal's judgments. While many guards and administrators claimed they were following orders from above, the tribunal found that the decentralized nature of camp command often granted significant autonomy. Commandants had the ability to intensify or lessen certain practices, allocate resources, influence disciplinary measures, and control the treatment of prisoners. In this context, Lipman's decisions were judged not as isolated incidents, but as part of a pattern of oversight that directly contributed to suffering and death. The sheer number of prisoners under his authority amplifies the scale of his administrative impact. While documentation cannot always link specific fatalities directly to specific orders, the tribunal held that command responsibility applied to the systemic outcomes of enforced labor, inadequate care, and punitive routines. By the legal standards applied after the war, allowing conditions that predictably resulted in death constituted criminal liability. This principle became central to many of the convictions issued during the Dachau trials. The records of Lipman's case remain part of the historical archive used by researchers studying the structure and function of the camp system. They provide details on how the SS delegated responsibility, how forced labor was organized, and how commandants interacted with guard forces and administrative staff. His trial transcript includes testimonies from multiple survivors, offering first-hand descriptions of daily routines, punishment practices, and the challenges prisoners faced. These testimonies, combined with the tribunal's findings, cemented Lipman's legacy within the historical documentation of the Nazi forced labor system. His personal fate, arrest, Trial, conviction, and execution became part of the broader post-war effort to legally address the crimes committed inside these camps.